Welcome back to the program. Good to have you here. We're currently having a Shining-esque blizzard here in Denver. I'm loving it because I'm just hunkered in here all cozy doing the Ed Lover dance. As you can see since last show, I've made the frankly horrifically bad decision to shave. Now, what am I back to? This, the fat face.
Fat face!
Fat face, fat face, a fat face.
Fat face.
I feel it was getting a little ratty and it needed a refreshment. See, this is really just like mowing a lawn. It's coming back in soon. Hold on, close that bullshit. Yeah, so the fat face is back. And yeah, thumbs down. So I'm immediately gonna grow back another goddamn beard just to hide the fat face. So I've been listening to a lot of this new Matt Berry album, The Blue Elephant, which is fucking amazing. Him at his proggiest, which I love. But that's in non-metal news. In terms of in metal news, been listening to a lot of this new insane Aeon album, God Ends Here, which is just Aeon's last album, Aeon's Black, was one of my favorites ever and had the best death metal production ever. And I was lamenting how I'd never see them again because they had supposedly broken up. And then like maybe a month later, there was a brand new Aeon album that's amazing and almost trumps Aeon's Black, almost, except for one thing. They did that Necros Christos thing of putting a fucking intro between every song, which really drags down the momentum of a death metal album, but that was their artistic choice, and you know, it's very cinematic. But check out that album. I think it's kind of a masterpiece, and not many people seem to have really given it a lot of due. But beyond that, how are you? How are you? That's what's important here. What's happening? No, actually it's not, because I can't hear you. Wait a minute. Wait, we live in a technological society, don't we? Today in the Filth Chamber, I will be using this newfangled interweb technology to answer some of your questions. Let's see what the folks on the street need to know. Your questions? Stay with us. I have come here to the Crypticus Twitter in order to consult you guys for some questions and see what I can do in terms of answering those as sarcastically, inaccurately, and just meanderingly as I can. Because that's my brand. Not saying I know what the fuck I'm talking about. I'm just saying I'm going to answer some of them. For whatever that's worth. Hopefully it'll be worth about fucking 10-15 minutes of your goddamn time. You, like, the rest of your life is so important you can't stop and watch this. Come on. Just looking to fill up your day with delightful Patrickness. Come on, this is for you. I'm doing this for you. My finger's on the pulse of something. My finger's on something. I don't know if it's a pulse, but my finger is on something. All right, now here we go. Question number 1 from our friend Jeremy Bartelt, who's been listening to the show for a long time, even back to the Filth Chamber days. He asks, how about Patrick's top 10 albums he would like to remaster? The albums I would like to remaster. Holy shit. I've already done a fair number of them in secret. You know, I kind of shared them with friends of mine. If I could share those remasters with the public in a meaningful way, I would. Albums I would love to remaster. Now, this is presuming like an actual label would come to me and give me the option to officially remaster something. I would love to do Incantations Onward to Golgotha. I think really could use, frankly, a remix from the ground up, not just a remaster, but that one would be really great. I would have to answer this more in terms of what I wish I could remix than remaster, because a lot of the albums that I have problems with, it goes way deeper than the master. it goes maybe all the way back to them tracking it, so, and what mics they used and so forth. But another one I think is a really great album that could use a touch-up is Deceased's 13 Frightened Souls. It's a very sloppy album, sounds almost like a demo, but I really think that if you went in and gave it the 5-star treatment, it's just a great album. I read an interview with King Fowley where he talked a lot about going back and remastering the albums, and he's very much against shining or polishing those up, and he really doesn't care about production, and that kind of makes me sad because I think their albums a lot of them are masterpieces, and I really think they should be treated as such. I really would love to hear all the Deceased albums, given the treatment and sound of their one album as The Weird Travel On, which I think is a masterpiece and has the perfect production and is one of the best thrash and, thrashy, death metal-y horror albums ever. One of my absolute favorites, an absolute masterpiece. I want the sound of that album given to all the other Deceased albums. And I think that would be my choice overall. I would want to be able to go through and just give the entire Deceased discography a hand job. No, I'm sorry. What were we talking about? No, give the entire Deceased discography an audio boost and make everything sound nice. Because I love those albums. Love those guys. My man Twitten in Waters on Twitter is asking, why are there so few bands that draw direct influence from Ripping Corpse? To those of you unfamiliar, Ripping Corpse was Eric Rutan's first major band, the band he got started in. They only ever successfully put out, I think, one demo and one album. For many years, kind of a cult, underground, not that well-known death metal album that a lot of people would say, have you ever heard this? Did you know this was the guy from Hate Eternal? And it's very thrashy. Scott from Dim Mak was the singer. They were just kind of a really awesome slayery death metal band. Rutan's playing on that is very odd. There's a lot of very strange riffs that I personally couldn't come up with. I bet you there's probably actually a lot of bands drawing influence from Ripping Corpse. You just can't tell because they don't play like Rutan. I think there was some beef there between who has the rights to that album. So still, I don't think it's ever gotten an official re-release, and to this day, I think the rights to the album are up in the air, so I think many people haven't heard it. Such a great album, and it had been remastered and put for free on Bandcamp by one of the members of the band. What else we got here? Another question from Jeremy Bartelt, Jeremy Audio on Twitter, who is also a producer I forgot to mention earlier. Crypticus is forced to go on tour. Who is your dream touring lineup? What is your dream guitar touring rig? Well, Jeremy, not only is this your second question, but you put 3 questions in it. So that's unfair, bro. You're being unfair. You're taking all the Crypticus up. But you know what? I like you, so I'm going to answer your questions. Crypticus is forced to go on tour. Yes, Crypticus would have to be forced to go on tour because I hate touring. I've toured with other bands and I hated it. And so I essentially started Crypticus specifically to never tour. Perhaps one day I'll play a live show here or there or something, or some kind of performance that'll be captured somewhere. But playing live I felt was a very unsatisfying situation in terms of compromise of audio, never being able to hear what was going on, having to hump equipment everywhere, having to talk to a lot of annoying, weird people. So my dream touring lineup: to play in an abandoned Gothic church to about 50 people with a sound setup completely controlled by me with perfect audio and all the equipment I want. I would ask for Bloodbath to reform with the classic lineup with Michael Ackerfeld and Dan Swano. That would be one of the bands. Then I would want Dan Swano to do a solo set with as Infested, where it's just him playing to a drum machine. Okay. With the vocalist Dret there. Okay. So almost like a Mortician-y style set from Infested. Okay. Then I would want Luciferion to reform and play a set. And then I would come in at the end. Crypticus would come in. I would need a bunch of people to fill in. Since I can't play guitar and sing at the same time, it would have to be Roger Johansson on vocals. Brynjar Helgeton would fly in to do the drums, of course. On bass, I'd want B-War from Marduk. It'd be me on guitar. On second guitar would be Dan Swano. And then there would be a keyboard player, of course, which would be... I'd want Matt Berry to do the synths during the Crypticus set, okay? And then, yeah, you're asking about my dream guitar rig. I play a Harley Benton baritone, which is right here, 7-string. So I'm not super picky about guitars. It'd be a 7-string baritone of any make or model, but non-active pickups, 70 gauge strings. I'm talking the fat bastards. I use the Carl Sanders strings here. Not calling him a fat bastard, I mean his strings. Play those through a baritone 7-string into a Proco Rat pedal or a Metal Zone, going into like either a PV 5150 or a Mesa Boogie double rectifier. That's usually it's somewhere between those. Those are the amps I generally like the tone of. And then, you know, any kind of array of cabinets that would be really complementary to those. I would want a stereo guitar setup. I know that Kurt Ballou does that, and I know that Eric Rutan does that. So, yeah, I would want my guitar to be represented on both sides. Then, of course, you know, Mr. Swano would have his amp array as well. And then, of course, we'd have Matt Berry in the back with his Moog and all his the other synths. Roger Johansson on vocals, like I said. B-War on bass. So yeah, that'd be your Crypticus show, and then I'd be somewhere in the corner there hiding while all those guys do all the work for me. So yeah, there you go, Jeremy. So we'll get to work on making that happen ASAP. Next up on the hopper, we got our friend Papa Wolf, aka Helldad2 on Twitter. He asks, do vocalists have any techniques to protect their voices? Perhaps I can best answer it by saying... I assume he's specifically asking about death metal vocalists, because I couldn't tell you shit about opera singers. Yes, they do. They do in general have things to protect their voices. I don't, generally. My voice is very odd, as you can hear, and so it's even weird that I can get... When I growl, it doesn't really hurt my voice. I've mentioned before, I was friends with Terry, aka Christ Butcher, from Maveth and Excommunion and Dethroned and a bunch of other legendary brutal death metal bands, and he has a very, very guttural style. And he always talked about chocolate milk. Yeah, Terry would get, if I remember correctly, it was Doritos and chocolate milk, and he would just and be all greased up with that before he did a session of growling. All right, next, at Breakfast Metal on Twitter asks, brutal death metal albums tend to be extremely recognizable from just the album cover. Would you like to see more variation, or is that clearly codified style good for the genre? Well, I don't know if it's good or bad for the genre. I think it helps identify the genre, because let me tell you, you know the difference between a thrash metal album cover and a brutal death metal album cover. You know that shit immediately. You know, I do feel that in recent years, brutal death metal cover art has gotten a little more interesting, a little more landscapes of hell and representations of the apocalypse and so forth, and a lot of them very beautifully done and imaginative, mythical and occult, and less just pictures of poop. Remember that shit? Like in the fucking 90s, there were bands that would just put like a toilet full of shit would be the album cover. And it's like, guys, do you think I'm going to buy this on vinyl and put this on my wall? Thanks for your questions, Phil.
I appreciate you listening.
Oh, guess what? We got a second one from Phil. He asks, why does Indonesia so dominate the brutal death metal scene? Is there some consistent element to the sound of bands from that country that gives them the edge? Or is it just a general high level of quality? The reason Indonesia is dominating brutal death metal is because they love it so much. You know, no other country right now seems to love brutal death metal the way they do. They love brutal death metal the way that Norway loved black metal, or the way Sweden loved melodic death metal. It's their national genre that they've latched onto, so they've started to perfect it because there's such a hot scene with so many young people in it, jumping in, making it fresh and new. And you know, most of them are just taking some very old influences and putting new spins on them, but like you said, doing it with quality. And something I've really noticed is that Indonesian brutal death metal, like on the whole, has some of the best production. Even when it's raw and ugly, their production will just be really perfect for that band. They are just cranking out so much quality brutal death metal. It's starting to bring a legitimacy. I think it's both. It's the sound of the bands, and it's the general high quality. Yes, they are currently the world leaders in the industry of brutal death metal. Hi, Dr. Nick on Twitter. He says, favorite death metal song about spiders. Favorite death metal song about spiders. You know that Slayer song? Arachnophobic! Can't control the spider phobia! Right? Is that how it goes? No, that's not it. What is a good spider death metal song? I'll have to research this. Nick also asks, Corpse Grinder recently said death metal is defined by the vocals. E.g., if you put King Diamond vocals over Morbid Angel, it's no longer death metal. I know subgenre definition questions are pedantic. I mean, there's all sorts of power metal bands that are just as musically as extreme as, say, a thrash band, but you wouldn't know that they were not a thrash band if not defined by their vocals. Like a lot of the difference between brutal death metal, melodic death metal, old school death metal is more than just the vocals, although all of those have different styles of vocals as well. So I don't think subgenre questions are pedantic at all, because I'm a huge believer in subgenres. In fact, almost every style of music I like is not a genre. It's a subgenre of a subgenre of a subgenre. I like that because I think it's very important to help distinguish music. I worked at a record store for many years, and let me tell you, you need to know what kind of music you're getting. I don't understand this thing like there's no such thing as genre. Like, okay, so you listen to Garth Brooks, No Fences, then you take a listen to Extermination Dismemberment, and you tell me if there's any fucking difference between those two. Yes, there is, and they shall forever be apart. I don't believe in labels. Like, okay, well then that bottle over there, it might have Gatorade or it might have piss in it. Take a sip. You need labels, okay? And part of the labeling of things is the vocals, especially. King Diamond could sing over Garth Brooks' No Fences, and that would no longer be a country album. But it would be an awesome album. You know, peanut butter and chocolate, when you smush them together, it's no longer just peanut butter or chocolate. It becomes a third thing. It becomes heartburn. So yes, I guess so. Or not, or whatever. I don't know if I answered your question. Oh yes, but there's a second part. Alternately, Trevor, this would being Trevor from the Black Dahlia murder, seemed to suggest it's the content that makes the death metal. It's got to be macabre. So which element is more important? Would you rather have guttural vocals with benign lyrics or clean vocals about brutal subject matter? Well, I listen to a lot of gothy bands, so I am familiar with a lot of stuff with clean vocals about brutal subject matter, and I love it. I love that too. Because, I mean, you can have a very macabre, dark country song, and it's still, that doesn't change the genre. It might change the subgenre of the kind of country you're listening to. In my opinion, the most important element are the formal musical elements as presented. What kind of vocals, what style of guitar playing, what style of composition, what tempos, what style of production. I think people get up in a tizzy about genre too much when I absolutely believe in just being a genre purist and loving the genre that features the exact checklist of things that you love. Next up, we've got Von Ronson on Twitter, which is actually Corey Monster from the band Theatus, which I've mentioned before, are great, and you should check out their album, which is really good. He asks, do you agree that every wrestler should have a bolt thrower song as their entrance theme? Corey, I don't agree. You know, everybody likes to kiss bolt throwers' ass because they have, well, first of all, they have one of the best names in death metal. Second of all, they have one of the most awesome pioneering women bass players in death metal, the most awesome and cool cover art and subject matter. But I got news for you folks. Bolt thrower ain't even like the top 20 heaviest bands that exist now. They're great. I love bolt thrower. I actually prefer bolt throwers early, crusty grindcore kind of phase. I said this on Twitter and I almost got my balls pilloried for it. But I think Frozen Soul are just as good as bolt thrower. And they would be like the modern equivalent of a bolt thrower. And I think they kick just as much ass as a bolt thrower. They also have an awesome female member in the band. And their album crushed me when I listened to it. So I think that every wrestler should have a Frozen Soul intro, unless they get a Theatus intro. Why are you selling yourself short, Corey? They could have a Theatus theme song. Every one of them. You could compose a theme for every wrestler, I have a feeling. And you're constantly tweeting about wrestling. You're clearly a huge fan, and I love that. I love keeping up with wrestling through my friends who are fans. Hey, my main man, Schiller from Death Metal Radio. You guys all know him. Believe me, I don't need to introduce him. The man's a legend in the field. He asks, what's the connection between death metal lyrics and misogyny? The question, I think, should be, why is there a connection between death metal lyrics and misogyny? And the answer is there shouldn't be. I can only assume it has to do with the fact that at the time it was supposed to be about the most taboo and unforgivable subjects. So that's maybe why folks like Chris Barnes originally were so, I mean, come on, he was even throwing pedophilic shit in there and stuff. So I think it was just supposed to be meant as an element of extremity, like this is the worst thing ever. But then after a while, it actually just became de rigueur for the genre. I think it was just people that loved the early bands trying to imitate their style. Like so many of the misogynistic, brutal death metal bands are just trying to imitate the style of Butchered at Birth, for example. So I think that's what it is. And I think a lot of people who are actually just very misogynistic use that as an excuse to get into the genre and loved that element of it. So it's kind of cool that that's going away now. I know that Schiller is not a fan of that. I'm not a fan of that. I don't mind violence and nastiness in death metal, but I think it's really easy to write a really violent, brutal, nasty song and not be forwarding those ideas as something desirable. In fact, I would say like someone like Trevor from Black Dahlia writes some incredibly intelligent, nasty lyrics. You know, he's still fucking corpses and slicing things up and, wearing titties on his face and whatever, but it's classier. He's wearing, like he says, he's wearing an apron while he does it. So I don't know. I think that's more interesting. I always liked that Carcass's lyrics. When I first discovered their medical legal lyrics, I thought was so brilliant, and all the hidden metaphors in it were so interesting, and yet they were still singing about chopping up people into mulch and sewing people up into instruments and playing people's corpses like bagpipes and stuff, and all that shit was amazing, and it was intelligent, and it was funny, and I think that that's the gold standard, and I think many bands now are taking the Carcass route in terms of going for more intelligence, and even to the point now where there is an anti-misogyny thing happening in the genre, with bands like Castrator and so forth, who are saying, no, fuck you, we're going to write a song about violence towards men, or make an actual song that's making a specific commentary on violence towards women, which is going on too. So, things are looking better. But yeah, it's something that I was never a big fan of. Yeah, well, I think that's good enough, huh? I mean, was that good enough? Uh-oh. Baby boy is drooling over here. Pardon moi. Yeah, I think that's good, huh? Did I cover everything? I may have missed some questions because I posted these questions and about 50,000 people retweeted it without asking any questions. So I'm just going to assume you're all racists and you hate people. Okay, that's my assumption. Are you going to prove me wrong by asking me a question next time? We'll find out. We'll find out on the next episode of Megatrends and Brutality with your host, Patrick Bruss. Thanks everyone who sent in a question. I hope I prattled on long enough for you guys to masturbate to. I assume that's what this is all about. Yes? Yes? Baby boy here has to step outside, and I have to step outside and smoke a little bit of the refresh. I'm wishing you well. I'm wishing you lots of health, and I'm wishing you lots of fucking death metal. And as I always say, love you. Love everything you do. Go fuck yourself. I can't drop the new mic. It's too expensive.